For example, in America, we do it doggy style.
Okay.
But now in Italy, you do it al pecorino, you say, which is sheep style. Okay. So one of the final films my father directed had the Italian porn star Mona Pozzi in it, who was, the biggest or second biggest porn star at the time, next to Cicciolina. It was my job that when my father on the set, in the middle of a sex scene is, calling out to Mona Pozzi to transition into doggy style, I'd have to go over and whisper in her ear, al pecorino. So she's CC, okay. And then.
But first, a word from our sponsors.
Stoicism. It's all about being resilient and self-reliant, right? It's all about being a man, needing no one, and having no emotional response to the external world whatsoever, right? Well, if that's what you think Stoicism is, and you'd like to learn what actual, capital S, Stoicism is, the ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and virtue ethics framework centered around developing a good character and service to the cosmopolis, then hi, I'm Tanner Campbell, and I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my podcast, Practical Stoicism. Every weekday, I release a new episode focused on actual Stoicism, and if that's your thing, I hope you'll check it out. You can find Practical Stoicism wherever you already listen to podcasts or at stoicismpod.com.
Welcome to the Man-Whore Podcast.
Shout out to the silky sluts, the lacy lovers, and the polyester puppy players. This is Billy Procida, and you're listening to the Man-Whore Podcast. What the fuck is happening outside? New Yorkers are finding out for the first time what the air quality index was. I remember I had to go to a birthday gangbang in Sacramento because that's how half of my sentences start when I tell a story. And and I get out there and like the air's all fucked up and it smells like there's a fire everywhere, because there is. And I'm texting my friend about it and she's telling me about the AQI and I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And I open my weather map and at the top of the weather map, like it's all of a sudden this section of the weather app that I normally don't see. Because in New York City, normally the air quality index, that number is like at the bottom of all the numbers. Because it's like fine, it's or good. And so I don't really need to see it. But like in Sacramento, it was at the very top and it was just like, yo, red alert, don't breathe. And so now today, like I go outside and the AQI is at the top of the fucking thing. And I got out of the subway in Times Square and I was just like, what's on fire? It smells like 9/11 out here. This is insane. I feel like this is just like karma for all the times I've shat on Los Angeles. This is just payback. Be like, ha 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 ha. You wanted to make fun of... I'm not going to say anything else about your water shortage. I'm not saying nothing. LA, you have a lot of very pretty people who live there, and that's where it's going to end. That's all I'm going to say. But to the rest of you who can breathe comfortably outside, I'm wearing a mask outside again, not even for COVID. This is crazy. But welcome to the pod. This week on the show, I've gone Gerard Damiano Jr. He's the son of the director of the classic, maybe one of the most famous pornos of all time, Deep Throat. Thank you, everybody who wished me a happy birthday, both publicly and privately. Thank you to y'all who have shared links to the Man-Whore Podcast on your social media. Stickers coming soon. That offer is good all month long for my birthday month. Just make sure you send me a screenshot. But I'm getting tired in this old age thing. I'm only 34 years old, but I'm getting like sleepy at nighttime. When there's a hacienda party, I need to either do like a yin yoga around 8 o'clock, or I have to take like a nap around 5, 6, or 7 o'clock. Otherwise, I'm gonna hit 12:30 a.m. and be tired. 6:30 a.m. This is fucking bullshit. I did not sign up to keep living to wake up that early. I am sincerely scared about Fantasy Fest towards the end of the month. I do not want to like get sleepy in the middle of my reverse gangbang, which is scheduled to start at 12:45 a.m. I know I'm capable of still having a good time that late at night, but just like I'm nervous. I might have to take my Adderall much later that day. Speaking of Fantasy Fest, a couple weeks ago, I spoke about in the monologue, this whole concept of applying for a reverse gangbang and trying to be more selfish, being able to trying to get comfortable with receiving pleasure again, and receiving pleasure where I don't also have to like prove my worth sexually in the process all the time, nonstop. And but after that came in, I did get this email from one fan. He calls himself number one sub. We're just going to say, he wrote, "Hello, Bobby," which is not my name. "Yesterday I listened to your latest podcast and there was a possibility of maybe a reverse gangbang to a male that won a survey or something." Filled out an application, but sure. "Well, I may have an idea that you may want to think about." And then he just goes on to give me what is clearly his fantasy. Like, this is not necessarily my cup of tea, but just he's like found an excuse to just tell me what gets him off. And why not share that with all of you? He wrote, "First, there will be one female dom and 4 female submissives." And he put a hyphen in between sub and misses, which is not stylistically correct, but I'm into it. "Of course, you will be involved." Oh, great. Thank you. "A St. Andrew's cross will be set up at a 45-degree angle to the floor. Bring your protractors. A spotlight will be trained on the cross with the rest of the room dark. The female dom, dressed in a sexy military garb with a riding crop, will walk out alone and slowly inspect the cross. She then will place herself behind the cross. Just outside of the spotlight, she will call for her guards to bring out the prisoner. 4 sexy sub-missives in box formation, and you in the middle will walk out to the cross slowly and stop just before. At this time, the dom will walk around the cross and inspect the prisoner, then turn around and address the audience. The prisoner failed to make his master come in a timely manner and must be punished. Can't relate. His punishment will be very, very difficult to live through. If he does live through it, he will be set free." She turns around, addressing her submissives, and orders them to bind you to the cross. The submissives then stand behind their dom in a half circle while she inspects their work. She slowly walks behind you to cover your eyes with a blindfold. She walks back around to the front of the cross with a loud voice and orders that the torture devices be brought into the room. Her guards bring a table over from across the room and place it aside the cross. On this table, there are many different devices: handcuffs, feathers, paddles, ice-dripping candles, and many other things that she may need to torture you with. In a loud with which to torture you, number one sub. That's a bad sub. We do good grammar in this fucking house. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. Okay. Shh, it's fine. It's fine. I would be a terrible dominant. Do you see how quickly I caved? I can't be mean. I can't insult your intelligence. It just makes me feel bad. And when I feel bad, I don't feel like I want to fuck anyways. In a loud voice, the dom commands the cross be set horizontally and 2 feet off the floor. Bring your rulers. The spotlight widens so everyone can see what's happening. First, the 4 submissives start working on you per the dom's request. Feathers, ice, candles. He gives no explanation to how they will be used in his fantasy, but I guess we're all going to use our imaginations. After about an hour or so, the dom will call the subs to take their positions, 1 on each hand and foot. The submissives at the hands will produce a vibrator that the prisoner must hold. The vibrators are turned on, and the 2 submissives at that position will mount the vibrators and pleasure themselves. Okay, well, the St. Andrew's cross typically has your hands tied up there, but I see what you meant here, and I actually think this is hot. To be bound in a way where, like, yes, I'm going to be used to give pleasure, but in a different way where I'm just bound and holding vibrators that then you just grind your pussies up against my hand, into that part of your fantasy, buddy. I will probably steal that at some point, but for now, you got to remember, you got to set the visual. Bind the hands where? Help us see your vision. This is a live workshop, everybody. The subs at the feet position will start sucking his toes and tickling his feet. And after about 5 minutes of all this vibration and foot sucking, the dom orders the subs back behind her. The leading lady slowly walks around the cross and straddles your head, forcing you to eat her pussy. Oh no. Oh gosh, no, don't make me do that. She screams, "Eat my pussy," as if your life depends on it. She proclaims that if she comes, you will be set free. You eat her pussy with all your might. She squirms and screams with delight as she comes all over your face. She's weak at the knees and commands her subs to help her back around to the front of the cross. The positioning language is throwing me all off, man. Okay. She commands the cross be reset back to the original 45-degree angle. After a minute or two, she walks up and removes your blindfold, and you are met with a smile. She turns to address the audience. The slave has done well and has made his master happy. His reward will be one of great honor. He will be now my first submissive. She orders the 4, I suppose, lesser subs to undo your binds and get you off the cross. Applause and cheers are heard from the audience. You are led away and are given a cape. On the back of this cape, it has this number 1 sub. Yes, man, I got the gist of what you were going for. That's not what I put in my Fantasy Fest application, but hey, I hope you get the opportunity to experience that sometime. Sounds like you've put a lot of thought into it. And like, I don't know, low key, any Hacienda members listening, but you can apply to be in my gangbang if you buy a ticket to Fantasy Fest. So like, no big deal, but that's a thing. My life is weird. If you want to send me your comments about this week's episode, if you want to send questions seeking advice, if you want to share with me what your Fantasy Fest gangbang application would have been, you can always send any and all of that over to manwhorepod@gmail.com. ManwhoreCon, it's coming up, everybody, August 3rd through August 6th. You can get your weekend pass in the link in the show notes. Very excited. People are coming out. We got people flying from very far away places. The ManwhoreCon HQ residents. I think there's 1, maybe 2, but I think just 1 bedroom left to be reserved. You can email me if you want details on that. It's going to be a party. We're going to have a fucking good ass time. Another good ass time, by the way, next weekend, June 16th. Yes, the Naked Comedy Show at Hacienda. We've already sold like nearly half the tickets, and it's still like 10 days away. So you're going to want to get yours soon. Ticket links in the bio. For the first time ever, by the way, we are offering discounted 2-show tickets. So if you want like come hang out, take your pants off for several hours and chill out and enjoy 2 distinct lineups, that is now an option. And you also see my other stand-up comedy dates down there as well. One last date you might want to take note of in the notes of the show, commonly known as show notes, is the, hey, can you put a little extra hot spicy meatball on the hot movie night? That was terrible. But it's after 11 p.m. and I'm so nervous to be too loud for my downstairs neighbors. They are sweet, sweet boys. But yes, the next hot movie night. June 14th, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to open it up in the Champagne Room, and we will start the show at 9:30 p.m. That is going to be available to all of my Patreon members. So yeah, if you want to come watch some porn with your fellow fan whores, with yours truly, you need to be a member of the fan whore community. You got to be like Josh Nabashian. Yes, 77777, buddy. He knows what that means. I don't even really know what it means to him, but I know that he knows what it means. So that's my little shout out to Josh for this week's fan whore appreciation moment. 7s all day. 7s all day. I hope I'll see you at Hot Movie Night next week. Love catching you in the Champagne Room. And you too can become a member and support the show for as little as $2 a month. Going against the advice of my business manager, I have turned on the 7-day free trials in celebration of my birthday month. For my birthday, I'm giving you stickers. For my birthday, I'm giving you free trials to my Patreon. Next thing you know, for my birthday, I'm going to give you head. Who knows? But you can test the behind the scenes bonus content and extra access for 7 days, no cost to you, at patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. Or you can download the Patreon app and find me on there. Gerard Damiano Jr., he has been internationally touring a remastered copy of his father's hit porno, Deep Throat, the 1972 classic. It's been now 51 years since it's been out, and he's currently trying to get y'all to vote to get this is real, the Library of Congress to adopt Deep Throat into the archives, into the National Archives. So you can do that by going to votethroat.org. He'll tell you more about it later in the episode, but I had a really great time chatting, and we're going to hear it right now with Gerardo Damiano Jr.
Do you have trouble sleeping after a long day? Do you also love free podcasts? After years of struggling to fall asleep, I discovered meditation and hypnosis as a way to calm my body and mind before rest. I studied in those two disciplines for years, and now I host a podcast called Sleep Cove that helps millions of people around the world fall asleep every night. Subscribe to Sleep Cove wherever you listen to podcasts right now for a better night's sleep starting from tonight.
Stoicism. It's all about being resilient and self-reliant, right? It's all about being a man, needing no one, and having no emotional response to the external world whatsoever, right? Well, if that's what you think Stoicism is, and you'd like to learn what actual, capital S, Stoicism is, the ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and virtue ethics framework centered around developing a good character and service to the cosmopolis, then hi, I'm Tanner Campbell, and I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my podcast, Practical Stoicism. Every weekday, I release a new episode focused on actual Stoicism, and if that's your thing, I hope you'll check it out. You can find Practical Stoicism wherever you already listen to podcasts or at stoicismpod.com.
Tour with Deep Throat because it's a major part of my father's story, certainly his most famous film, one of, if not the most famous golden age porn film of all time. So my sister and I were able to restore the film, preserve it for future generations, and then premiere it on its 50th anniversary, which was last June. So we kind of kicked off a world tour celebrating, the 50th. We did 5 cities in Italy. We were in Berlin, 3 cities in Belgium, which was very interesting. Amsterdam. We showed the film in Vancouver, British Columbia. Also in Seattle, Washington, and we're now planning a West Coast tour to kind of wrap this up.
Does Deep Throat have like a strong international notoriety?
Absolutely. Very big in Italy. The Italians just love it. That's why we went back twice. We did, 5 shows, 6 if you include the Pordenone Docs Fest that we did a couple of weeks ago, where we actually just Skyped in to present it. Otherwise, we've only presented the film live and have organized talkbacks after, where we invite film critics and historians, academics, sex worker rights advocates, also lawyers, and some golden age porn stars as well. Because there's so many stories that revolve around this film is that younger generations have no idea, and it's good to have a historian to kind of contextualize it, because when you look at Deep Throat today, it's actually pretty tame by today's standards, by what you might see on your smartphone in a few clicks. But at the time, it was revolutionary, and so we feel that when we present the film, it's important to to explain that. Also, there's, always been controversy surrounding the film, so we like to address that, but also give the audience opportunity to ask questions and talk more about, the film.
Yeah. And it's a good time right now to say I'm here with, tell me if I say this wrong, Gerard Damiano Jr.?
That's correct.
Okay. I forget how many people, Damiano? Is it Damiano?
Damiano, yes. But, I lived in Italy for some years and learned to say Gerardo Rocco Damiano.
But your father was the director of Deep Throat, as well as many other amazing golden age adult films.
Yes, that he was. He wrote, directed, edited Deep Throat. I
like how you say wrote, and a lot of people are like, porn, writing, what? Yeah, there used to be plot. Yeah. It used to be like a whole through line and everything.
Yeah, there is actual dialogue in Deep Throat for those who haven't seen it. And he even wrote the lyrics to some of the original songs that are in the film.
Including the opening song?
Well, the opening theme song is instrumental, but the Deep Throat theme...
Oh, sorry, yeah, like the theme song. The one I remember. So we watched this, as I told you, for our hot movie night in the Champagne Room, and that was the first thing when we heard the song. We were like, whoa, this porno has a theme song. The soundtrack on this whole flick. We were blown away.
Yeah, so my father is credited with writing the lyrics to the theme to Deep Throat as well. But he went on to, he certainly appreciated the celebrity that the film afforded him, but he went on to make much better films. He'd be the first to tell you Deep Throat is not a very good film. It was an early work, and they did the best that they could with what they had to work with. Even though the budget was large for the time, still the whole thing was shot for less than $25,000. So, even back in the 70s, that wasn't a lot of money to make a 35 millimeter feature length film. But he went on to make better films such as The Devil and Miss Jones.
So good. We've also watched that for Hot Movie Night.
My father was much more proud of Devil and Miss Jones than he was of Deep Throat, but he felt that that kind of film that he wanted to make that was a lot more serious and heavy even. Yeah. I mean, Devil and Miss Jones it
starts with like screaming, right?
Well, it starts with the suicide. It's a very direct, the actress is looking into the lens of the camera and she's distraught. Yeah. And so I don't want to give any away for those who haven't seen it and might have a chance to. This was a more serious film, the kind of film that my father wanted to make. But, at the time that Deep Throat came out, audiences weren't ready for that. The idea of seeing hardcore sex on the big screen in a theatrical setting was something that was still relatively new. There had been exploitation and sexploitation films for years, but this happened at a time when the laws were starting to change and people were just seeing what you could get away with. Films were still being busted. My father and many other people involved in Deep Throat were arrested for obscenity charges and had to appear in court across America. So the idea of seeing, a film like this was still very new. So the fact that Deep Throat is a comedy and very light and lighthearted made it more accessible for people that, never had seen a film like this before.
Did he want to make more serious adult films, or did he want to make films that had hardcore sex in it?
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because that's something that he would often say. He says, I don't make sex films, I make films with sex in them. And he always felt that the sex in his films should be integral to the plot and part of the character development.
Like musicals.
Yeah.
It's the singing, it's the fucking, it has to further the plot.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at Deep Throat, for example, the plot of Deep Throat, for those who haven't seen it, is, is pretty ridiculous. But the idea is this, woman can't get off. And she discovers that her clitoris is in the bottom of her throat.
Oh, no.
So the only way that she can untangle her tingler, as it says on the movie poster, is by, the Deep Throat technique. Now, again, as ridiculous as that might sound, first of all, it drew attention to the female orgasm, which was something very unusual in 1972. A lot of men, didn't know that women even had orgasms. They certainly never gave one, and they didn't know where the clitoris was anyway, so it might as well have been in the throat. So for some, it was rather educational.
But blowjobs were also like even a taboo sex act to do. It was like, or were we past it at that point? I feel like it was like a French thing for a while.
Yes. Well, yes. It wasn't. It was not as common, let's say, as it might be now, and the idea of coming up with the term deep throat to give this technique, not just oral sex, but taking the penis all the way down, to the bottom of your throat. By giving it a name, it gave couples license to talk about it. It was really the first mainstream porno film that had couples going on dates to see it, and women especially going, braving 42nd Street in New York City to see an adult film. And so, again, part of the, I think the allure of the film was this playful, idea of oral sex that, people could talk about it. Everybody was talking about it.
Honey, you want to do a deep throat? You want to do one? When we get home, let's do a deep throat.
And like that, and I can only imagine. I was just a kid at the time. I mean, my sister and I were on the set of Deep Throat. It's important at this time our lawyers make us say we were not exposed to any hardcore sex as children, but our father was very proud of being a filmmaker. So, he often included us. We would go on, location scouting, or if there was a location shoot, or any scenes without sex in them, dialogue and so forth, which back then, a lot of the scenes were not hardcore, not like films that were made later where it's just wall-to-wall sex. There was a lot of setup, which is what led me to bring up Deep Throat again, is the fact that even in the film Deep Throat, the sex drives the plot forward. There's not gratuitous sex scenes like you might see in a horror film or slasher movie or something where, in the first scene, the woman's got to take her top off for some reason, even though it has nothing to do with what's to come, except maybe, the trope that, the promiscuous woman is the first to get killed by the maniac or monster or whatever. But in Deep Throat, the sex all plays an important role, and in Devil and Miss Jones and all my father's films as well, is that although there is a lot of sex in these films, it's never gratuitous. It's always to not only drive the plot, but develop the characters. Linda or Miss Jones, even more so, her first sex scene in the film is very different than her last. And, there is character development and the character arc that is shown through the sex scenes.
Yeah. It's, and so like, and when you're talking about like being young, we were talking grade school age, teenage years?
I was 7 years old. My sister was 6.
And now you're touring the film around with like, I guess you say like Q&As and such, but like, is it at all odd to like go sit in a theater and watch a porno with your sister in a way? Like,
well, it's
at least like maybe in the early days of doing that.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because what's weird and what was weird to us is that it's not weird. We were at Porn Film Festival Berlin, where we presented the film, and we're there and we're watching these films, and afterwards we looked at each other and we're like, we wonder if anybody thinks it's strange. Like, it never even occurred to me. Yeah, it's a sex film, sure, but I felt like we're growing up enough to be able to watch a film and talk about it, and we like it, we didn't, it was a turn on, it wasn't, but it really shouldn't matter. I mean, my sister and I are very close. We can talk about anything, so why not talk about the films?
And were you all always like close, even like as kids? Like, were you like in high school? Were you all able to talk about dating with each other and stuff?
Well, we're very close in age. I'm a year apart. We're a year apart, and so we grew up together. And again, having our father. By the time we got to high school, our father was a very well known, celebrity pornographer. So, it certainly was different than most other brothers and sisters that we knew in their upbringing. We kind of had to stick together. because there's a lot of judgment, as you can imagine, back then and even still. People have all kinds of ideas of what that might mean, good, bad, or ugly. If your father makes a sex film, what does that even mean? How does that affect you as a child? And they would be surprised to know that we actually had very healthy, upbringing, and our father and mother too, that tried to raise us to be, comfortable with our bodies, that there was nothing wrong with the nudity when we were very young. When Deep Throat was made, we didn't even know what sex was, so it wasn't even a topic. But later, that sex is a beautiful, natural thing and not something to be ashamed of or guilty about. And our father grew up with a more of a strict Catholic upbringing, and so this was kind of revolutionary to him to have a guilt-free view on sex and sexuality, and he shared that with us. So in the end, I thought it was very it's a very healthy environment to be able to talk about sex. It's when you can't talk about it that's when problems start.
So like in high school and college and in adulthood, like you and your sister are out like in dating and meet people and eventually like getting married. Like y'all were able to talk about stories you had and dates you had and the good, the funny, the not so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for example, my sister talked to me when she went off to college, and I went and visited her at spring break. Yeah, it was my spring break, and she was in college down in Fort Lauderdale. So, what a perfect place to go for spring break. And she confessed to me one night. She said, all your friends were really cute, and a couple of them I really liked, but none of them would ever go near me because they were afraid of what you might do, because I was very protective over her, as I thought I should be. Now, most guys know that guys, especially high school age guys, are dogs, and you want to protect your sister, of course. And then it wasn't a secret what our father did, and some people might have looked at her in a different way, thinking, oh, this is the daughter of a pornographer, so she must put out or whatever. And so again, I just tried to keep them all away from my sister. I mean, it was just a natural thing. But later she said, again, when she was in college, she said, but, I really liked, this one, and I wanted to be with him, but I couldn't because you would always, chase him away. And after that, I said, you're a woman now. You make your own choices. It's not for me to interfere, but God forbid any of them raise a hand to you or you get in trouble, you can always, call me, come to me, and like that.
You realize like, oh, I should fuck them up after the fact if they were misbehaving, not just before on the off chance that they do. Well, especially to have that kind of relationship. I'm in my early 30s. My sisters, who like one's like a year and a half younger than me and the other one's like 5 years younger. And like, they're only now comfortable talking to me about sex. But those two, being like maybe 3 years apart or so, right? Like they were able to talk about sex and dating with each other, but it took us to like way proper adulthood for them to feel comfortable open up to me, even though I've been, talking about sex for a living for like 9 years.
Well, also not knowing them. I mean, obviously women, it's easier for them to talk,
for sure,
amongst themselves rather than talk about sex with a man.
But it's something special that like you and your sister could like have that open kind of relationship where sex wasn't taboo. We weren't raised with like sex was taboo, but we just didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. Or like if I was interested in one of my sister's friends, like it was a weird thing, but I wasn't going to care if a sister of mine was into one of my friends. I would just warn her if someone was a D-bag.
Well, I was interested in all of my sister's friends. So that's why when she said that to me, it really resonated. I was like, whoa, okay.
You said you were raised with like healthy views on bodies and sexuality. What do those conversations sound like? I think a lot of times people just say, we were raised well, with that. But then like what's kind of language is getting used and what kind of ages are different things being shared at? Okay.
For example, when we were kids, we had, my father had a subscription to Playboy magazine. So it was delivered to the house every month. Well, for the article, sure. Now we were too young to even read, but we were allowed to look at Playboy and not told that it was bad or dirty or wrong. And so, I'm an artist and an illustrator. And even as a young kid, Playboy magazine, back in the 60s and in the 70s had great illustrations. So there were great pictures and also, naked ladies it's not a big deal if you can look at them, what's the big deal? I mean, everybody has a naked body underneath their clothes. So it's only when somebody says, don't look at that, you shouldn't see that, you shouldn't look at that you start to, develop this guilt and fear and why, what's going to happen.
Otherwise, you wouldn't know that this was taboo.
Exactly. And so, of course, when somebody says you can't do something, it makes you want to do it even more so. So for us, having Playboy magazine around the house, and we were, wouldn't say encouraged, but just allowed to look at it and like that, look at all the pictures, look at all the beautiful women. We were, again, taught that the body is a beautiful thing and never anything to be ashamed of. When I was 5 or 6 years old, if you would ask me who I was going to marry, who I wanted to marry when I grew up, I would say Miss October. Huh. So, it was that kind of household. It's not that our parents brought up, sexual topics or whatever. They just, again, didn't make a big deal about it. Like the idea of a woman breastfeeding, for example. Now, when you travel around the world, nothing is more natural than that. Like, what could be more natural than a mother and child? But in America, it's become so taboo that you got to go in a special room, or, there's a woman on the subway has to be covered up with, blanket or something, where, again, it's the fact that she's got to cover up that makes people want to look, where if it was, just a natural part of everyday life, it would make no difference.
And so did you learn about sex, like in the mechanics of sex and pleasure at like later in life, like maybe in high school? Did you learn that from your parents, or do you learn that from pornography, or where do you learn about sex from?
Well, I have to say that there was a book, a very well written, very, very, very well illustrated book, a series. 2 big books. One was called Where Did I Come From? Okay. And these are thin books with great illustrations. And our parents kind of gave us the talk, the birds and the bees talk, that I don't know if parents do that anymore. I think kids just Google sex and then they go from that, or, where did I come from, and see what Wikipedia has to say.
Parents crack open the door, throw a box of condoms in there and just shut it real closely.
Yeah, you know all about this already, right, kid? We don't have to talk about it. Okay. It's usually like that. But, our parents kind of gave us this one book that just basically talked about the reality. I don't want to say the mechanics because it makes it sound so cold, but just the reality of procreation, how it works. And so we read these books and then we talked about it after. The second book was called What's Happening to Me? And this is a book about adolescence and puberty, which, basically in a very kind of, I don't want to say, medical, but it had all the right information and it was presented in, humorous and kind of, easy to swallow, pun intended.
As I spill water all over myself, not easy. Oh my God, I did so much. Oh my God, it looks like I just did a deep throat. This is bad. Okay. Sorry. There was more water in there than I expected when I brought to my face. I was like, oh, there's just like a little left, and then pow. Okay. I did not realize how much there was. So you're saying
reading those books that our parents, gave us to read and said, I want you to read these, gave us a foundation to have a conversation. And then afterwards we talked about it. And, again, looking back, I think that was a very healthy, way to do it because, we were at the age where we were figuring things out. But, kids at that age, they don't want to admit that they don't know. And, they lie to each other and like that. And, we didn't have the internet back then. And now with the internet, I think, in terms of sex and sexuality, the internet is a poor teacher because most people wind up on Pornhub or whatever. Kids are going to wind up and they start to confuse what they see on the screen with what people actually do or like. I mean, not to say that there's not some, good stuff out there, but there's a lot of stuff that's not good. There's a lot of, let's say, unrealistic depictions of sex and sexuality. There's a lot of misogyny on these porn sites where, women are abused and that,
or
that
are
kind
appearing to be abused.
Yeah.
But you have no one to contextualize that.
There are no disclaimers in some of these films where, again, whether the women are just acting like they're, upset and abused and, being beaten up or whatever, or choked and, to the extreme, or even, the prevalence of, let's say, facial cum shots, let's say, if you want to get specific, which is something that if all you did was look at, Pornhub or PornTube or RedTube or whatever tube or, like that, you would think that every woman wants you to come in her face at the end, when really, in reality, that's usually not the case. But it's very visual. Makes for great film and filmmaking, okay? Or not to say that a lot of the stuff you see is great filmmaking, but I'm just saying that, it's a function.
The purpose wasn't pleasure. The purpose was because we're filming this and we want you to see the
you got to see it, the money shot, right? So you want to see it, where when you're having an intimate moment with a real person, usually it can be much more pleasurable when you don't see it. Yeah. And that's not the disclaimer that's on the thing that a kid might be seeing, and that might be their first look at sexually explicit material. They don't have guidelines, and they come out of it with all kinds of ideas.
So what or who gave you context for what pleasurable, respectful sex is like?
Again, growing up in a household where we were able to talk about sex and sexuality.
So you come home and ask dad or ask mom and be like, hey, I was with this girl, like something was weird, it was wet.
Well, I mean, generally you don't ask your mom, okay?
I don't know.
Now, my dad and I were always very close, and my mom and I were close, but, again, I wouldn't talk to her about, what I did on a date.
I'm just saying my mom has said blowjob to me before my dad has said the word blowjob to me.
May I ask you what the context of that was?
It was Manwhorepod 2019, and we had an Ask Billy's Mom Q&A in the afternoon, and mom told a story of the day my dad found out she was pregnant with me, and I've never heard this story, and my dad, I think, will still barely say sex words in front of me.
Got it. So. Well, again, as a kid, I wouldn't bring, my issues with girls at school or whatever to my dad as much as, talk about his films when I was old enough to talk about them. I mean, he always, encouraged me to be involved in filmmaking, and I worked alongside of him. Even before I was old enough to actually see the films, I made props and painted sets and did stuff like that. As soon as I was old enough to be on the set, I was a PA and assistant to the director and like that, and would do stuff. The end of his career, he made a number of films for Italian producers. Yeah. And, I had lived in Italy for a time and learned to speak Italian. So I came on not just as an, assistant to the director, but also as a translator. Which, is a very, kind of rarefied skill set to be able to translate, sex terms into Italian, and from Italian to English. For example, in America, we do it doggy style. Okay. But now in Italy, you do it al pecorino, you say, which is sheep style. Okay. So, one of the final films my father directed had the Italian porn star Mona Pozzi in it, who was, the biggest or second biggest porn star at the time, next to Cicciolina, who you might have heard of. And they were both very active at that time. So, it was my job that when my father on the set, in the middle of a sex scene is, calling out to Mona Pozzi to transition into doggy style, I'd have to go over and whisper in her ear, al pecorino. So she says, si, okay. And then,
how do you say what is to fuck in Italian? I'm 333 days on Duolingo, so I'm just trying. I'm not to that part
yet. Well, there's different terms, and there's a lot of slang words. Italian.
Give me a couple good slang, yeah.
Ma vaffanculo, all'imortacci tua. Okay, that's more of a curse. It's go and do it in your ass, and I curse the souls of your dead ancestors.
Oh, I meant like more like sexier. Like if I said if if a chick was going to say to fuck her, yes. She says fuck me to me, what would she say?
Well, like in Italy, they use the term scopare, which is like to sweep. Okay. It's like the same verb you use to sweep the floor, like, sweep me or I'm going to sweep her, like that.
Okay, to sweep. But so if you're not going to your dad for like advice on how do I, whatever. So what did teach you sex, like ultimately?
Well, a combination of things. I mean, it's hard to say, but, I will say this, that working with my father and being with him, he was always very respectful to women. his early film, many of his films, but especially all his early work featured female protagonists. They're the stars of the show. So he was always more interested in the female perspective. And that's something that he shared with me, that it's not, it's not about you getting off. That's easy. It's about getting her off.
Yeah.
So, that's a good lesson I think any father should share with their son. My father often said that, that the female fantasy is far more interesting than the male fantasy.
Yeah.
That I guess the Taoist way of looking at it is that the female, let's say male desire is like a fire that burns really brightly and quickly and then flares out, where women's desire is more like a slow burn that gradually heats up and warms and lasts much, much longer and goes, much more intensely. It's not the quick flash. It's a much more developed, and profound thing.
And that's why I like to edge for 3 to 5 hours when I'm by myself, to train myself to be more like a campfire. It lasts forever till sometimes it's like, look, we got to pour water on you because we have got shit to do today.
Yes,
so, yeah.
Exactly.
Did you ever go through like a rebellious phase maybe in your younger years towards what your dad did? Did you ever kind of get weird about sex, almost like to push back against so much positivity?
No, to be honest, that never really occurred. It occurred to me. I was always proud of my father as a filmmaker. As I mentioned, as soon as I was old enough to be on the set with him and, see how he worked, again, it was like seeing movie magic, but also there's, sex and sexuality just right up front, being performed by professionals. Okay. Which, then were, by the time I first started working with my father was in the early 80s. And by this time, this is 8 years after Deep Throat. So now there's an adult film industry that never occurred before, there wasn't such a thing. So now you had veteran actors and actresses that were, kind of used to protocols and, being in sex film, where initially these were people that were, trained actors and actresses that were used to being in film, being in front of the camera or being on stage, but now were finding performing sex as an extension of their abilities as actor and actress.
The Devil and Miss Jones isn't the star of that? Wasn't she like a Broadway wasn't she a normal actress, like a Broadway actress?
Absolutely. Georgina Spelvin, who's fabulous. My sister and I recently saw her out in California. She just turned 87 years old. But yes, she had a long career before appearing in Devil and Miss Jones. And she had done a handful of adult films before then as actress. I think she was like 36 or so when she appeared in Devil and Miss Jones, which, by today's standards would be, beyond the shelf life of a young porn star getting into the business. But, again, this was a woman who was a dancer who appeared on Broadway. She was the understudy to Shirley MacLaine in Pajama Game, like that, and had been on a number of Broadway shows and productions and like that. So she was a talented and seasoned actress by the time she met with my father to be in the film.
Yeah. Now, and as you said earlier, like Deep Throat is like revolutionary at the time, even though by today's standards, pornographically, it might be like tame, right? Mm-hmm. But tell us, why was it so revolutionary? What was it about blowjobs on like deep throating that was so like taboo for then?
Well, I think the term Deep Throat itself kind of captured the imagination, but it was by no means the only hardcore sex film out on 42nd Street. But again, this is happening after a period of exploitation films and sexploitation films where there was a lot of films being made that had very strong sexual themes and sexual content, but you couldn't show hardcore sex. You couldn't show penetration. Right. So there's a lot of nudity, and there was a lot of simulation, but no money shot.
Yeah.
So when Deep Throat was made, this was at a time when as I said, laws were just changing, and there was a real gray area as to what you could and couldn't show. So filmmakers were always testing the limits, and the film would get busted, and someone would make another and come at it a different way.
Mean like cops would come in, or like
literally cops would come in with Deep Throat. They busted it a couple of months after it premiered, where a judge came and watched the movie, and then afterwards, signed a writ, and the cops came in and arrested people and seized the print.
Yeah, after the judge came, he was like, okay, whew, I need some water, and then you can come bust this place. I'm done with it.
So, Deep Throat was then busted again a few weeks later because they realized that they didn't really follow the proper procedure and protocol. So the film was back on the screen the next day, and then they came back with 50 uniformed police officers and made a big show of it for the TV cameras, how they're cleaning up Times Square, which was an old story. Every mayor up for re-election was cleaning up Times Square, and this went on for some time until it was actually Giuliani that finally did clean up Times Square and turned it into the Walt Disney World that we have today.
Yeah, sadly. What from the golden era could like present day porn use more of?
I would say respect.
Yeah.
Well, again, I would say respect to women in that. Again, I just see too many of these, clips, and now that's mostly what you see online. There's not a lot of films being made. I mean, and that's actually not true.
Well, because a lot of times what's uploaded on Pornhub is clips because they want you to go buy the membership where you will see the full 60-minute movie, but there'll be like a 3-minute clip on Pornhub.
Yes, but in the 3-minute clip, you can see that this is not The Devil and Miss Jones.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a lot of, again, look, I share my father's view in philosophy about sex that can be summed up in 2 words, and that's consenting adults. As long as everybody's consenting and everyone's a grown up, you do whatever the fuck you want. Mm. And who's to tell you can't? Who should be involved in saying what you can and cannot do? As long as nobody gets hurt and everybody is there of their own free will. And, so a lot of the clips that you see, again, they're not respectful. In some cases you have to wonder, wow, is that girl really crying, or is that her, is that part of her act? And, also a lot of the themes, there's a lot of, let's say, incest and stuff like that, which, I think it's odd to me is that when you see these clips that are presented as, stepbrother or brother and mom or, stepdad or all this stuff, family relationships, okay, is something that can only be developed in a film through, dialogue and acting.
Yes, that's why we have movies like Taboo with Kay Parker, right? Let's at least understand what's going on in this family before we watch them fuck each other. Come on.
Yes, and so, it's just funny to me that that's, so common online is to see, this, hey, sis, get out of my room. And, 20 seconds later, her top is off. And, like that. And it just, it doesn't, I mean, it's not what I'm into personally. Again, I'm saying this to say that, look, if that's what you're into,
it's a watered down version. We're not developing anything. Taboo, so Taboo is more of a mother-son thing, and Taboo 2 is, I was a Kay Parker fan, R.I.P. to a queen. And Taboo 2 is like a brother-sister storyline. But in both of them, the actual like incestual scene doesn't happen. Like that's the final sex scene of each movie. Like Kay doesn't bang Paul until the end of the movie. Okay, they build up to the things, so we at least have reason for it. We have character motivation, we have plot development, we understand what their dynamic was before. That's longer than the you're in my room, get out, right? It's like what's been this all about? Who are these characters? And we take that out of the incest porn realm and go to anything else, whether it's like someone's sexual awakening or a dysfunctional relationship. You can't turn it around in 90 seconds of lame dialogue. when I started watching porn, it was like Napster era. I didn't have Pornhub, right? It took too long. Like you download an image and you waited like 90 minutes for one fucking line, pixelated line by pixel line to hold one single photo. Download it, and sometimes you realize like a third of the way through, like I already have this one. And so I would just kind of download certain terms in Napster, and like what I could click and get at 13 was what I got, and it exposed me to a lot of that era. And so I got an early appreciation for like an adult film as opposed to just like these quick clips. I was like, okay, they're hot and it's bright, but like whatever. I want to know why. What's the backstory behind this pizza guy? Okay, like how does he really want this blowjob, or is he thinking in the back of his head like I could actually use the tip? Like okay, I'm short on rent, and I could use the $20, whatever it is. And so I don't know. I at least got an appreciation for it at a young age. And today, I mean, you say some of the names of these people. I fucking interviewed a sex coach a few hours ago. I said deep throat, and she was like, "What's that?" And I had to explain deep throat, and I was like, "What?" Like even before I saw deep throat for the first time last year, I knew what deep throat was. You know, it's
sure. Well, my father would say he was more proud of coming up with the term deep throat than he was making the film, because the term made it into the dictionary, and then later with the Watergate break-in and the informant, you know, now there's two terms, you know, two definitions for deep throat. So whether or not you've seen the film, you should at least be familiar with the technique, which is, you know, again, not something my father invented. You know, he came up with a catchy name for it and, you know, made a film about it, but it's been around forever. I mean, you know, it's not, you know, there are very few, you know, things sexually that are new. I would say possibly with the, possibly except for the advent of some of the transgender combinations that are now available or possible today that, you know, weren't possible in the past.
Right. Well, I do have one last question. It comes from the Ask the Guest channel in my Discord server. It's a patron-only channel, so if you're a part of the Patreon community, you can ask any question for my upcoming guests, and I will ask it. So if this is a good question, it wasn't mine. And if it's a bad question, dude, I didn't think of it. So Chuck wants to know, and we've kind of, I'm going to kind of remix it a little bit based on what we've discussed, but like, he asks, how did you discover porn for yourself? So I'm going to kind of adjust with just more like, how did you discover porn for yourself, disconnected from being in and around the industry? Like, how did you discover the porn you were going to enjoy and how you engage with pornographic material, like without it being like, oh, this is my dad's film, or like, oh, I the Playboy on the thing. Like, how did you start to consume that personally in your adult life?
Okay, well, you know, as I got a little older and was, of course, very curious about sex and wanted to know more, you know, there was always a lot of, you know, books and materials, you know, not out in the open, but hidden around the house, you know. And so when my parents were at the house, I'd always be looking for the book, the thing, the pictures.
Oh, like everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Except, you know, my father had a 3/4-inch video player, you know, back in the late 70s. So, you know, that's when commercial VHS tapes weren't readily available. They were just starting to come out. So I was able to find tapes of stuff he was working on and like that. And, you know, and again, there were these big clunky video masters. And so I would, you know, watch stuff like that. And, you know, we had Playboys around the house, but we didn't have, you know, Penthouse and, you know, High Society and so forth. And that's something that, of course, you know, all my friends were, you know, swapping.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you found porn the same way a lot of people
like
of the day did.
Most people.
You didn't like go search out something like super different just because, you know, something like The Devil and Miss Jones or Deep Throat or other films of his maybe got like normal. I just would imagine like, oh, maybe like that's just so normal by the time you're like 24 that it's like, I got to go find something very different from what I like this industry standard. You know what I mean?
What did it, you know, by 24, you become so jaded that you've
Or like maybe like even like like written erotica. Like I mean that was also my introduction, was like either the old films or written stuff, because I went to boarding school. You couldn't have porn and we didn't have like internet in the dorms. So like I would print shit from home and I'd bring them and hide them under my mattress in my dorm room. So there's no pictures, so it was hard to get caught because it wasn't really porn, but it was so.
You'd have to read through the whole thing to determine whether or not it was obscene. You couldn't just turn to the centerfold.
Right. And so just the idea of like, I don't know, like I could see you getting into like a different medium of porn. Or get jaded with it altogether.
No, well, what you said is absolutely true, and I'm a bit older than you, so I come from a different, a different generation, which is hard for people today, younger people to understand. Was without the internet, without video and like that, you had Playboy magazine under your mattress, or there were kids that had National Geographics just to see, like a naked indigenous person, in the book like that. I mean, people in the 60s were really hard up for, sexually explicit content. And so again, for a kid in the 50s or 60s or even early 70s, National Geographic could be, porn.
Yeah.
And then, some kid in class had, dirty French playing cards or whatever like that, and, that went a long way. It got passed around the whole class. Everybody got a chance to look
at these 52 images. Like, you're like, that was enough for us because we don't know when we're going to get the next 52 from.
Yes, I mean, it was, again, a different time where if you missed Wizard of Oz on TV, you might have to wait a whole year to see it again.
Wait, sorry. Was there nudity?
Yeah, no, but just to say that this idea of like instant gratification, we didn't know any better, so we were happy with what we had. And, like, again, some French postcards, or like I said, there was a deck of playing cards that was hardcore and explicit, where you didn't see that stuff, even in Penthouse or High Society. I mean, you could show, the wide open beaver, split beaver like that, but you couldn't see penetration. So if you actually saw a picture of something, it was a big deal, and again, it's hard for people to imagine today that with a couple of clicks, have millions of images, hundreds of millions of images, videos, clips, and so forth, sites, where you can interact and like that. So although, I would say that, in some ways, the fact that, books are being banned and so forth, and pornography in general, comes under fire. At the same time, there's much more access to a much broader range of adult content, where, back in the 70s when Deep Throat was made, there were maybe 6-7 different kinks, of which one, considered homosexuality as kink, a deviation.
Like a whole category.
Yes, that would be a category. And then BDSM is another, foot fetish, and maybe there was some golden showers, quote unquote. And that was about it. The bestiality thing on the fringes, everybody knew about, people were always curious, oh my God, interspecies, whatever. But that was about it. And now with the internet, I think they've identified like 14,000 different fetishes, kinks, or, kind of specific things that people are into.
Like you click BDSM and then there's 80 categories underneath BDSM just for them.
Subcategories. I mean, there's the categories of people that don't have sex. It's like the ultimate kink of, like you can't even have sex and in a sexual way, I can't even begin to explain all the different, things that I've found or come across online. And I think there's a great equalizing effect that the internet has had in that respect. Is, my sister and I were recently at Porn Film Festival Berlin, where we got to see a lot of films. Now, back when Deep Throat was made, my father was one of a handful of filmmakers that were all pretty much white men, making films for themselves and for other white men or other men in general. But at, the porn film festivals that I've seen recently, Cinekink and so forth, there is such a variety of so many different kinds of films made by a whole range of filmmakers that are gay, straight, in between, male, female, trans, every different variation of that, and they're making films for themselves and everyone else. So there's a lot more variety than there was back then when Deep Throat came out. So, today it's a drop in the bucket. Back then it was, something brand new that was, revolutionary to most people.
Incredible. Well, Gerard, you're still touring the film, or are you going to be doing another run of live events? Or
well, we're finishing up the world tour for the 50th anniversary of the release of Deep Throat. We have a few things in the works. We're going to the West Coast, and we're going to be doing some screenings there. We'd like to do one more show in New York, which is our hometown. We've done 3 screenings here that were all very different and all very interesting. And we've had some great talkbacks and great discussions. To again look beyond just the film and what it meant back then and what it still means today. And so I invite people to visit DamianoFilms.com, or also I should mention we are still trying to get Deep Throat recognized by the National Film Registry, which is a function of the Library of Congress. And this is
so do I gotta write my senator? Is that
well, it's much easier than that. Go to votethroat.org as an orgasm, and all the information is there.
Votethroat.com?
.org.
.org, okay.
Yes, and you'll find some information there, and also a link to go and cast your ballot. Now, any U.S. citizen can vote for up to 50 films per year, and they will choose 25 films to be recognized as films for preservation. And so even though their mission statement is to include the full range of American filmmaking, there has never been an adult film. Now, there have been some X-rated films that have been included, including Midnight Cowboy, which is a great film. I think even, the original King Kong was rated X when it came out. So it's not just about the X rating, but it's about film with, hardcore sex in it. So if any hardcore film was to be selected, we feel that it should be Deep Throat because, according, again, to their requirements, a film has to be 10 years old or older and exhibit historic, cultural, or aesthetic significance. Now, the aesthetics of Deep Throat could be argued, but its cultural and historic impact are undeniable. So, we feel that it should be recognized, and so we encourage everybody to go and vote Throat.
And the artistic vision to have a doctor's office in just some basement, I think that was one of my other observations. I think she's at the doctor, and I think that it looks like they're in just someone's hippie basement. Okay, I'll play with this. Yeah, it's but that was great, man. I've never thought voting was more important than now. So again, votethroat.org, and I look forward to hopefully you'll do New York so I can watch porn with you and your sister.
And not just us in the communal setting, and that's something that I should mention is that that was one of the most revolutionary things about Deep Throat when it came out in 1972 is
celebrities went to go see in the fucking theater.
Yes, and that when you went to see the film, again, you're going to see it in public, in a theatrical setting where it's a communal experience. If the joke is funny, everybody laughs, like that. If, somebody jumps out, everybody, screams together. It was like that. But now seeing an adult film where people were adult enough to do that together. Now, 50 years later, it's become as novel now as it was then because, most porn is consumed on a smartphone underneath the covers. So it's rare that you would go out in public to see a film. And so it really, helps you to look at things in a different way when you're able to experience this with a group. And so that's something that we've been doing with Deep Throat, and we're working on The Devil and Miss Jones and hope to do the same with that.
And I will definitely be at that one again because that was wild. Well, Gerard, thank you again so much for chatting with us. And, why don't you go ahead and say goodbye to everybody?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. It's a honor to be here, and I look forward to seeing you down the road. And after Devil and Miss Jones, we're putting together a full retrospective of all of our father's work, so that we can share that. Again, he'll always be known for Deep Throat, But he did go on to make better films that I believe he would much rather be, would much rather be remembered for. So thanks again for having me.
The best place to discuss this week's show is in the episode discussion channel in the Champagne Room, our super free, super fun, super sex positive Discord server. Of course, you can check that out in the links in the show notes. Keep that birthday sharing going, everybody. I was very appreciative of those of you who shared on June 5th, but you can still share a link to the Man Whore podcast all month long. If you need like some sample text, you can say, yeah, it's like Sex in the City meets Howard Stern if he was a bit less of a prick, right? He's like a more sex positive Howard Stern if Howard Stern only had female friends. You can even lie to your friends and say, I'm not kinky. I'm not a giant slut, but I really think this podcast is interesting. And then you drop a link. And that helps me, and it gets you some free stickers. So you keep doing that all month long. Keep it coming, everybody. I very much appreciate y'all. But if you insist on, buying me something for my birthday, because freely sharing the podcast is terrifying, my Amazon wish list is in the show notes of every episode. Someone was messaging me being like, I'm having trouble finding it. I'm like, it's in the show notes. They're all in there. manwhorepod.com/thank you. Oh, and I also put in the show notes, I have a couple articles that are out on Mashable. I've got an article about edging. I wrote 1,500 words on how to wank for hours. And I've also got some sex toy reviews, some male sex toy reviews. That's a piece I'm really proud of. So I'll put links to those in the show notes. But with that, everybody, happy Pride. It's usually pretty proud around here. If proud equals queer, it's usually pretty queer around this podcast every month. But, enjoy the extra flags. Next week, we're talking all about gay bars. That's a fun one, everybody. Stay slutty, but in a proud way. Okay, now here's a teaser of my bonus episode with Gerard Damiano Jr. that's coming out tomorrow exclusively on Patreon for my $5 and up fan whores. In this bonus episode, we are discussing some of the controversy around his father's film Deep Throat, namely the controversy around its star, Linda Lovelace. You can hear the full bonus episode as well as nearly 300 other bonus episodes for free when you sign up for a 7-day free trial at patreon.com/manwhorepodcast.
And unfortunately, a lot of people today, either heard something or did a Google search and read something, or they know somebody that read something and made up their mind about the film without ever actually seeing it or without understanding the context of the comments that Linda made in 1980 after she had just released her third autobiography called Ordeal, where she talks about being abused by her husband and so forth. And, there's no doubt that she suffered greatly at the hands of Chuck Traynor, who was her manager and pimp, and also her husband at the time Deep Throat was made. But, again, without knowing her history and the events surrounding that, it's hard to really understand.
Wow, this person's trapped in the wrong story. Yeah. And we got to get them out of that story.
My name is Kevin Miller. I'm the host of the Self-Helpful podcast.
So many of the books that we read about family relationships, it's based on a theory.
Join me as I curate and translate the most effective self-help wisdom to help you elevate your personal experience and improve the way you show up for others.